Okay, creating PERT and Gantt charts. The problem with estimation, we've been talking about it for the last hour and a half, is that the more novel you work, the harder it is to estimate how long it's going to take you. The more creative you are, the less you know. Plus, we're optimists. Chuck had a rule of thumb, I think, in one of his estimation podcasts, is take your estimate, double it, and add one. That's not a bad rule of thumb. You will hear that very often out in the industry. Double your estimate, triple your estimate. Because that's probably more accurate than what you think it's going to take. Yes?
My question about that is, it seems like the longer your project is, the more unreasonable it may seem to whoever you're working for. You're like, if it's a 3-year project, and you
This is gutless estimation here.
If it's a 3-year project and you try to tell them, oh, we need 7 years to do it, like, they're probably not going to go for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Welcome to the profession.
Nice.
And part of what happens there is that there is often a deliberate underestimation of the time it will take in order to get it funded or approved, whether it's a within-house or a two-party system, with the developers knowing full well it's going to take longer. The problem with that, of course, is that you end up looking either, well, let me tell you the problem. First consulting job after Pages closed was with Eric. That's where I went on for the Motorola Iridium project. But while I was focusing on that, they were starting up another project doing network management backbone for a major telecom company here in the US. And 1st November, I get called into my first meeting on this project. I'm sort of the working chief architect and the mentor of all the chief architects that I'm training in-house there. And they said, okay, this is a project, it's network management. How many of you have ever heard of ASN.1? Anyone? Incredibly obscure. Probably dead. And if so, well so. It is a sort of a database programming language for management of network nodes. This was going to be developed in ASN.1. No one at AirInc had ever used it. It was going to be done using a development environment out of IBM that had not been released yet. They were waiting for the 1.0 release for a development environment, for a language no one had ever used. So I get into this project, or this meeting, and the salesperson, basically, at AirInc, the person who's selling this to the big telecom company, is saying, okay, so we're going to start coding 1st of December. We'll start testing 1st of March. We'll ship 1st of April. Who signs up for this? He's going around the table and everyone's raising their hands. I'm thinking, are these people crazy? And he gets to me and I said, no, I don't sign up for this. He said, we have no architecture. We have no requirements. We don't know what we're building. This is a 1.0 release of a programming language no one here has ever used before. And I, of course, was the skunk at the garden party. But I went back to my cubicle afterwards and I wrote a memo and I listed 13 risks that I saw with this project. And I sent it out to all the upper management. And then basically had the VP over the division send me an email back and say politely, shut up an architect. But me being me, there's certain freedom of being a consultant. Maxim, you'll hear me, if I haven't already mentioned it, and I'm sort of going my own Stack Overflow here. About 25 years ago, I was at a software engineering conference, and attended a session that talked about how to effect change within your organization. The person who taught it, and I should track him down because I deserve to give him credit for this, said, let me tell you a dirty little secret. The only way you can affect change in your organization, or hope to affect change in your organization, is to go in every day prepared to be fired. So if you're not prepared to be fired, then you're going to compromise. You're going to do what they want you to do, even if you know it's not going to succeed. The advantage of being a consultant is you're never going to be fired at some point anyway. Becoming a consultant was terribly liberating. Trust me, I have been very, very blunt with clients of mine. And in this case, about 6-7 weeks after that meeting, I dug up the same email, sent it out to exact same people, and pointed out the fact that 12 of the 13 risks I had identified had already come to pass. Because, as a friend once told me, I have a thing about being right.
You missed it.
Yeah, I did this one. There was one there that I thought key people on the team might leave, and no one had left. But other than that, all the other risks had come to pass. My engagement as a consultant ended about another 6 weeks after that. By that point, it had already slipped a month as far as the estimate. Actually, it probably slipped 2 months at that point by the estimated completion, because that was the start of April. We still thought they were 2 months away. And I had a very nice lunch with the VP and with his right-hand person. And I have a lot of respect for them, and you know, it was a great engagement. It launched my whole consulting career. And the VP said, you know, what final wisdom do you have for us? You know, VP said wisdom, but you know, basically that. I said, well, I know we've butted head a few times, and part of that is just part of the whole process. I said, but you should not have ignored my email on the risks. I said, because this is going to continue to slip, and the client is going to think you were either dishonest or incompetent or both. And that's the key issue. That's why you want to be honest in your estimating. As it turned out, the whole project ultimately was canceled. It kept slipping and slipping and slipping and slipping, and it slipped to completion from start of April to start of September, and then was canceled altogether. Yeah.
You know, a wise man once told me the secret to happiness is low expectations. And so, you know, basically this wise man was actually a stake president and said that the conference was going to be 2 hours and 15 minutes long this time, and it ended up only being 1 hour and 45, and so everybody was overjoyed, right? And so I think if you can manage to convince someone that it's going to take twice as long as you think it will, low expectations. And then
Under promise and over deliver.
Yeah.
That's the engineer's maxim. So, challenge of thinking through all the tasks that need to be done, of correctly identifying the critical path, of keeping the schedule up to date. Boy, that's really hard. And schedules tend to be more linear, waterfallish, than iterative. So, I could launch into half a dozen more stories, but I'll avoid it for now, so we can get through here and get you guys out of here. PERT, Program Evaluation Review Technique, created by the Navy in the 1950s. I'll skip it. This is what a PERT chart basically is. Start point, end point, tasks in between, arrows indicating the flow through the chart. So, you have a task and an estimated duration. Some charts will label the duration on the arrow, some will put it in the bubble, in the box or bubble itself. The arrows show what must be completed. So here you've got task 1 and task 2 both have to be completed before task 3 can be done. Task 4 can be done in complete parallel to these 3. That's basically what's showing. It's actually a very simple and very effective technique. And this is the idea, is to indicate dependencies, and then given the dependencies to indicate what's called the critical path. And the critical path, and here it's marked in green, and here the duration is on the arrows, not the bubbles, says if any of these changes, the overall completion date will change. So, for example, to get 1 to 3 to 5 takes a total of 7 days. From 1 to 2 to 5 only takes 5 days. That means you can actually slip this path by 2 days and it won't affect anything. But if this slips, this slips, or this slips, or this slips, it will all affect the end date. That's what a critical path is, simply put. Nothing terribly complex. Back. We already said that. Shows the dependencies and the critical path. So here's a sample one. There are, I don't have any templates for PERT charts because typically this is something you're drawing out in an app, and you know, if you use Lucid Chart or whatever you want, there's like, if you just Google PERT chart template, you will find dozens of places that allow you to draw PERT charts. Yes?
Is this assuming that you have max parallelism? That you're going to be doing all of the routes at one time? That would be
Well, it assumes that they are inherently parallel. Now, your question is a good question because it means, what if I don't have the personnel to do all these in parallel? Well, in that case, your estimates here probably need to be longer.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll get to with the Gantt chart, is we'll actually show how personnel are assigned to complete these tasks.
Gotcha.
So, what you need to do with your project and with your requirements is to come up with a PERT chart. Feel free to look at the wikis from past semesters to see how people have done it. And get inspirations as to what tools to use, but this isn't, the actual drawing isn't inherently different. I'd say use Visio, except Microsoft has gotten really bizarre with Visio. It's hard to license. It used to be one of my favorite drawing tools, and ever since Microsoft bought it up, it's been a pain in the butt. But you'll find stuff online. Any number of tools that are free that you can use to create PERT charts. I can use MS Paint if you want. So what you're going to do, identify major tasks and key events, establish the dependencies, agree on your first order estimates, and draw your PERT chart. Like I said, free templates available online. Please indicate critical path if you want full credit. Do that. Make sure you're all agreed on it. There's a good chance as you do this, you'll end up making revisions to your requirements. You may drop features as a result or push them up. Also, feel very free. I know a number of people have done this. Basically do a PERT chart up through the first demo and then a second PERT chart from the first demo to the second demo. So you're sort of converging onto this, and you may even have paths that don't end, that the first demo doesn't depend upon. In other words, you could have this path here go off here because these two were really only necessary for the second demo. So keep that in mind as you draw this. Any questions on the PERT chart? Okay. Gantt chart is not an acronym. A guy named Henry Gantt invented it over 100 years ago. And it's pretty much a two-dimensional layout with an explicit timeline. So this is what a typical Gantt, simple Gantt chart looks like. Here's the timeline. The tasks are in rows. There are ways of indicating, and we'll see this in the next one, of indicating dependencies. But the goal here is to be able to look down on any given week and see what you're supposed to be working on. So unlike the PERT chart, which is all about durations and doesn't have a calendar grid, this is all about saying, okay, the last week in September, these three should be done, we should be doing this and this, and we will not have started these other ones yet. Excel, there's lots of Excel. In fact, I have links now. If you go to the main class wiki page, you'll see project templates, and it's got links to both a Microsoft Word and a Microsoft Excel Gantt chart template. This is probably Microsoft Project. How many of you use Microsoft Project? Anyone? One? Yeah. It suffers from feature rights. It sort of has everything plus a kitchen sink in it. Use Excel. Anyway, so what you've got is a task name, duration, estimated start date. Now this one here is showing, for example, things that have to be done before something else can be done. So this is a more complex chart. I'm really looking more for something like this, okay? You're not developing a commercial project. This is a 10-week project within a class. The idea here is to think through what it's going to have you do. So, now your PERT chart and your Gantt chart should actually agree with each other. In other words, if you have a task that says it's going to take 10 days on your PERT chart, it should also take 10 days on your Gantt chart. I mentioned you've got the deliverables. They should agree with each other. And deadlines and dependencies still match. There is a good podcast on project management, but it's a very long podcast. I'll allow you to use your time watching. If you haven't already watched the project management podcast, you can watch it and count it all as billable hours. But the section you really want is starting in the first video from about 63 minutes in to the end of the video, and then the first 20 minutes of the second one. Here are some online resources, and I'll get these slides up for PERT chart templates and creating Gantt charts. There's actually Gantt.com. Chuck's podcast will talk about a tasks table, which you can create if you want to. This is a way of using shorthand. In other words, in your PERT chart in particular, you may have a task identifier, simply task A or task 01 or whatever, and then have a separate table that says what each of those tasks are. PERT chart should visually identify the critical path. Gantt chart should somehow tie to your team members so you know who's doing what. Post it on your project wiki. That's due Saturday. We'll go over them in class next week so everyone can see them. So create both a PERT chart and a Gantt chart with a critical path on a PERT chart. And the reason that's all emphasized is that I've had past semesters where people have done one or the other, not both. So, any questions? So, by Saturday, both the PERT and the Gantt chart, your latest stats report, watch one podcast. Very light reading for next class period. Next week we're going to talk about architecture. So we've got one chapter out of Physical Man Month, one chapter out of Accelerate, and one set of Webster readings. Yes?
For curiosity's sake, why do we do the PERT and the Gantt chart before we even have an architecture for our software?
Well, because you have the features. The PERT and Gantt chart, I mean, the question is good, but part of your task is going to be coming up with the architecture design.
And I'm assuming that PERT and Gantt charts are subject to change.
Oh yeah, yeah, and let me emphasize that. This is one of the eternal dilemmas of software engineering. One of the truisms is ultimately the only accurate documentation of a computer program is the program itself. Everything else is out of date to some one extent or another. Every time you make a change or add a feature, you don't necessarily go back and make a change to the requirements or to your architecture documents or so on. That said, part of the reason why, again, I didn't ask for a big requirements document. Most of you actually produce pretty small requirements documents. I'm fine with that. You're going to be revising it. The point is you should be using these documents to communicate within your team. All of you should be familiar with these documents for your project. And if you see something you don't understand or you disagree with, speak up promptly. Say, wait a second, you've got this here, and I don't think that's going to work. Don't assume that whoever put that document together necessarily knows what they're doing. I don't mean that negatively, but you know, it's hard to have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people all move the pencil together. Someone actually does the diagram. Someone actually, you know, writes a document, does that. You should be learning to use these as a communication tool so you don't all have to be in a team meeting all the time. And when there are questions or issues, raise them promptly, clearly, and kindly. Kindness is important. Other questions or issues? I've all been patient. This is probably going to be our longest lecture. Maybe. Anyway, I don't like to sit and talk for more than about an hour and a half. I assume you all know what you need to do this week. I promise to be good for those of you who aren't here. Let me say right now that I'm going to get the videos up so you can watch it. Give credit. A few of you have changed a few deadlines. A few of you still miss stuff. I like the comment someone made on Slack is that, you know, mercy continues until it doesn't. So, again, my concern is mostly, I just want you to read this stuff. So I tend to be a bit forgiving about that, but if it gets chronic, I'll start to get a bit more hard-nosed and do the work. If there's no other questions, I'll let you all go and see you in a week. Thanks.
How much can you play? Could I have meet up here and then
I started on the block. So at that point, library.
I think this is the one that I'm supposed to be like.
I need to go that way.
I just always invite them to because even like just like one, like just one from there to too big for
Pretty forgiving. Yeah, I'm sure it does. I haven't said this.
I will. So yeah, do you guys want me to like? You guys gonna do it? Don't
Version 1.2.
Actually, you just shoot it. That's fair. I guess I can just so you guys kind of see what I'm doing. I'll put it in there.
And
So where are we going then?
On there.
It's just for text.
If it's this one right there, that's my last.
And
if I had
If you just search physical symbol,
if I thought I've got my
edition change it, and if you go to that script that takes each of the sales codes and requests, makes requests like these are the correct and then just
what's the expected
yeah.
So we met today about designs for the front end. So
I'll figure out.
layout for what
Yeah.
we you have it written down, but it's you made it mostly chartable, so
fascinated by
Sure.
the history.
Oh, yeah.
But we're thinking
Now,
first from
by
that.
experience,
It's like just follow. Calendar,
It's probably
So you could say
So
like,
I put up this
What
time,
am I
in the morning.
Oh,
That's really the only thing that.
Um,
Do they look like they're in a nice order?